The phone rang at 4:47 in the morning. Not a text, not a notification. An actual phone call from a number that had never been used before and would never be used again. And the man who answered it, sitting alone in a dark kitchen in Washington, D.C., already knew that whatever came through that speaker next was going to be the last ordinary moment of his life. The voice on the other end was calm, unhurried, the voice of someone who had done this before. It said, "You have 72 hours to make the most important decision you will ever make. And just so we understand each other, there is no good option. There is only the one you can live with." Then the line went dead. The man sat there for a long time, holding a phone that had already forgotten it existed. Outside, Washington was still asleep. The monuments lit up in the dark like tombstones for better men. And Michael Reeve, 41 years old, deputy director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, husband, father, 17-year civil servant who had never once broken a rule in his life, set the phone down on the kitchen table, pressed both hands flat against the wood, and breathed. Because sitting in the breast pocket of his jacket, right next to his heart, was a USB drive that could bring down a presidential candidate, expose a billion-dollar corruption network running straight through the U.S. Treasury, and destroy the one person in the world he loved most. He just didn't know that last part yet. This is the story of the 72 hours that followed. Stay with me, because nothing in this story is what it looks like. Not the villain, not the victim, not even Michael himself. Let's go back 48 hours. Tuesday morning. Michael Reeve arrives at the Treasury building at 7:14 a.m. like he does every single day. Same coffee, same route, same badge swipe. A man whose entire professional identity is order, precision, and rules. The kind of man who gets promoted not because he is brilliant, though he is, but because he is completely, utterly, unconditionally trustworthy. His office walls are lined with citations, commendations, framed letters from 3 different Treasury secretaries. He has spent 17 years building cases against money launderers, financial fraudsters, and the people who think the law is a suggestion. He has never once looked the other way, not for anyone. Which is exactly why someone chose him. At noon, Michael opens his lunch bag. Inside, a sandwich, an apple, a bottle of water, and a manila envelope that absolutely should not be there. He stares at it for a moment like it might disappear. It does not. He glances around his office, closes his door, and opens it. Inside is a single photograph, black and white, sharp enough to have been taken by a professional. And the moment Michael's eyes land on the 2 men in it, his sandwich becomes completely irrelevant. The first man is Senator Raymond Castle, 62 years old, Senate Banking Committee chairman, the most powerful financial legislator in the country, the man currently running to be the next president of the United States with a 14-point polling lead and the kind of momentum that feels inevitable. The second man is Alexei Morov, former FSB, known Russian financial operative, a man whose name appears on 3 classified watch lists that Michael himself helped build, a man who is not supposed to be anywhere near a U.S. senator, a man who is not supposed to be on U.S. soil at all. The date stamp on the photograph, 6 days ago. The location, a private members club in Geneva that officially does not exist. Michael puts the photo down, picks it up, puts it down again. Then he reaches into the envelope and finds what he somehow missed the first time, taped to the inside back flap, so small he almost missed it, a USB drive. And on a strip of paper wrapped around the drive, written in clean block letters, 5 words. Her name was Lena. Open it. Michael goes completely still, because Lena Osai was his best analyst, 27 years old, sharp as anyone he had ever worked with, the kind of person who saw patterns in financial data the way other people see shapes in clouds, instinctively, effortlessly, and always right. She died 6 years ago in a car accident on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway on a Tuesday night in November. The investigation was clean. The ruling was accidental. Michael spent 3 months afterward trying to find something wrong with that ruling, and found nothing. He had spent years trying to stop thinking about her. Someone just made that impossible. He makes one call. No details, no explanation, just a location and a time. An hour later, he is sitting across from Flora Nkosi in a coffee shop on K Street, and the photograph is under the table between them, and Flora is looking at it with an expression that tells Michael she has seen this name before. Flora Nkosi, 38, former CIA analyst, now a senior investigative reporter at The Atlantic. She and Michael grew up 3 blocks apart in Baltimore. They went to the same high school, survived the same neighborhood, and have known each other long enough that she can read what he is thinking before he says it. She is the only journalist in Washington he trusts completely. And right now she is telling him something that makes the coffee shop feel very, very small. She has been working a financial corruption story for 8 months. Shell companies, ghost accounts in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands, hundreds of millions of dollars moving through U.S. financial institutions in patterns that look almost legitimate until you trace them back 3 layers and find there is no real business attached to any of it. She could not break the story because she could not find the original source of the money. She could not find who the transactions ultimately served. More of in that photo is her missing link. More of is the money. And $400 million of it has been flowing through 11 U.S. banks, all of them regulated by Michael's office, for at least 3 years. Michael stares at the table. 3 years, moving through his jurisdiction, and he saw none of it, which means either his entire unit missed it or someone inside his unit made sure he never would. Flora leans forward and says, very quietly, "There is a black sedan parked across the street that was not there when you arrived. Do not turn around, just listen. Whoever sent you that photo wants you to move. The question is whether you move in the direction they intend or whether you get ahead of them." Michael does not look at the sedan. He picks up his coffee, takes a slow sip, and decides something. He is not going to be anyone's battering ram. He is going to find out the full shape of this thing before he takes a single step. And then he is going to do what he has spent 17 years doing, his job. What he does not know yet is that the full shape of this thing includes people he loves. And that by the time he sees it clearly, the only move available to him will be the most painful thing he has ever done. The next morning, Michael's boss calls him in. Victor Strand, 60 years old, silver-haired, Washington royalty in the truest sense, the kind of man who has been inside the machinery of government so long that he and the machinery are essentially the same thing. He has been Michael's mentor since Michael was 32 years old and did not know how anything worked. He came to a Manny's 8th birthday party. He wrote the letter that got Michael promoted to deputy director. Michael trusts him the way you trust someone who has never once given you a reason not to. Strand closes his office door and tells Michael that Senator Raymond Castle, who is about to become the next president, has personally requested a pre-election financial transparency review from the Treasury. A quiet audit. He wants Michael to lead it. He wants it done quickly. And he wants it done favorably. That last word sits in the air like a smell. Favorably. Michael looks at the man who mentored him for 9 years and asks him to say that again. Strand does not say it again. He simply looks at Michael with the particular patience of a man who has asked other people to compromise themselves before and is simply waiting for the process to complete itself. He says, "This office exists because people like Raymond Castle allow it to exist. Do not be naive. Not now, not with what is at stake." Michael asks, very carefully, "What exactly is at stake for you, Victor?" And here is where the temperature of the room changes. Strand leans forward and tells Michael that someone saw him meet with Flora Nkosi the previous afternoon. That Flora Nkosi has been building a story about financial misconduct in this building for 8 months. And that Michael opened his lunch bag the day before. A lunch bag that was apparently interesting enough to warrant a private conversation with a national journalist 1 hour later. The air leaves the room. Michael realizes 2 things simultaneously. First, Strand knows about the photo. Second, Strand does not know about the USB. Strand asks him, in the quietest and most dangerous voice Michael has ever heard him use, which side of this he is on. And Michael Reeve, 17-year civil servant, rule follower by the book until the book itself becomes the problem, is standing at the edge of the first impossible choice. Option 1, play along. Nod, agree, go back to his desk, conduct the fraudulent audit, bury the photo and the USB and the memory of Lena Osei, and protect his career, his family's safety, and the man who mentored him. Become complicit in something he has spent his entire life fighting against. Option 2, refuse, walk out, trigger an investigation, and guarantee that whoever is watching his every move, whoever put a sedan across the street from his coffee meeting, whoever has access to his building and his lunch bag, will stop using him as a pawn and start using him as an example. Michael stands up. He picks up his briefcase. He tells Strand he needs the weekend to review the scope of the audit and that he will have a preliminary report on his desk by Monday morning. Then he walks out. That is not a yes. That is not a no. That is a man buying himself 48 hours before everything explodes. In the elevator going down, Michael pulls out his phone and sends Flora one word. Lena. She responds in 3 seconds, where and when. He has chosen. He just does not know what it is going to cost him. They meet in an underground parking garage in Georgetown, an hour after dark, with both their phone batteries removed. No signal, no record, no trail. Michael sits in the driver's seat of his car with the engine off, and Flora sits next to him, and the parking garage is the quietest, coldest, most honest place either of them has been in years. Flora tells him what she knows about Lena Osei, that Michael does not. In the months before she died, Lena had been flagging suspicious wire transfers inside Meridian Capital, the kind of transactions that should have triggered a mandatory review but somehow never did. She had tried to escalate internally and been told, twice, to stand down. She had then quietly reached out to a contact at the FinCEN compliance desk, someone outside her own institution, someone who could push from a different direction. That contact never responded. Lena was killed 11 days later. Michael sits with that for a long time. The parking garage hums around them, distant traffic, the smell of concrete and oil. He asks Flora if she knows who the contact was, the person Lena reached out to at FinCEN. Flora opens a folder and slides it across the console. The contact was someone with credentials inside the Treasury Department. The IP logs for the outreach trace to a terminal on Michael's floor, used 3 times in the 4 months before Lena died. The person who received her messages and never replied did so from a workstation that was either Michael's or directly adjacent to it. Michael stares at the page. Someone on his floor watched Lena raise her hand and said nothing. Someone on his floor let her walk into traffic. And then Flora shows him the second piece. Across all 11 financial institutions connected to the castle money, 11 different banks, 11 different cities, 11 different compliance departments, there is a single recurring digital signature pattern on the transaction approvals that should have been flagged. One ghost employee, using different names and different credentials, approving the same type of transfers across a decade. The ghost had credentials that reached not just inside the banks, but inside the secondary review channel at Treasury itself. Which means this was never just a banking scandal. Someone inside his own organization had been running interference on $400 million in corrupt transactions for 10 years. And that same someone had received a desperate message from a 27-year-old analyst trying to do the right thing and watched her die instead of helping her. Michael realizes something that changes the entire shape of the story. He was not chosen because he is powerful. He was chosen because he is credible. Whoever sent him that USB drive needs someone with his clearance and his reputation to open a door they cannot open themselves. They are using him, and the moment that door is open, they will not need him anymore. Flora tells him they need to crack the USB that night and be ready to publish everything the moment they do. Once the files are open and moving, they have hours, maybe less, before whoever is watching figures out what happened. Michael agrees. He tells her there are 3 folders on the drive. He has only opened 2. He says he will come to her apartment at midnight. He says to be ready. Then he goes home. His daughter is at the kitchen island doing homework. His wife is making dinner. The house smells like garlic and something warm, and a Manny looks up at him with 14-year-old clarity and says he looks terrible, and he laughs, actually laughs, because she is always honest in the way only children are. He kisses them both, goes upstairs, sits on the edge of the bed, opens the laptop, plugs in the USB, opens the third folder, and the world comes apart. The third folder contains financial records, hundreds of pages of them. Clean, annotated, cross-referenced. Someone spent a long time building this file and they built it to be airtight. And the records are devastating. Not just Senator Castle. 3 additional sitting U.S. senators, a deputy secretary of state, a former national security advisor. The full architecture of a corruption network so large and so deeply embedded that Michael can barely breathe looking at it. And then, 40 pages in, he sees a name that stops everything. Nadia Reeve. His wife's name, account numbers, transfer records, $2.3 million, 6 transactions over 4 years, each one carefully structured to stay under reporting thresholds, each one routed through a shell company connected to a consulting firm that Nadia does work for. Work that Michael never looked closely at because he trusted her completely, and because she kept that part of her professional life separate, and because the last thing a man who investigates financial fraud all day wants to do when he gets home is audit his own marriage. He reads it 3 times. He stands up, sits back down, stands up again. Nadia appears in the bedroom doorway in her robe, telling him to come to bed. And Michael, in the quietest, most controlled voice she has ever heard him use, asks her how long she has been working for Raymond Castle. The expression that crosses her face in that moment is not surprise. It is relief. The specific, exhausted relief of someone who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has finally, been allowed to put it down. 4 years, she says, she had been doing legitimate consulting work, financial communications for political campaigns, the kind of thing she had done for years. Then the work became more specific. The money became larger. And by the time she understood the full shape of what she was inside, she was already in it far enough that walking out was not a simple thing. They had leverage on her, not just money, information. Things that could end her career, her reputation, everything she had built. Michael asks her, very quietly, if she knew about Lena Osei. Nadia does not answer immediately. And in that pause, in that silence that lasts perhaps 4 seconds but feels like falling, Michael gets all the answer he needs. She knew not that they were going to kill her. She says that desperately because it is true. She did not know what they would do, but she knew Lena had found something. She knew Lena was a threat to the network, and she said nothing. Michael stands at the window looking at the street below, a quiet residential street in Washington, the kind of street that looks like safety, the kind of street that turns out to be anything but. Nadia tells him the rest. She has been building the USB drive for 2 years, copying files, documenting transactions, mapping the network, waiting for a moment when she could get it to someone who could use it. She could not go to the FBI because the network has someone inside the FBI. She could not go to the press alone because the press without institutional backing could be discredited and buried. She needed someone with federal authority and unimpeachable credibility. She needed Michael. She chose Michael. She put the drive in his lunch bag herself. Michael turns away from the window. He looks at his wife, the woman he has been with for 16 years, the woman he built a life with, the woman whose face is the last thing he sees before he falls asleep, and he sees a stranger wearing her face. And he also sees someone who spent 2 years trying to undo a terrible mistake, and he cannot make those 2 things sit in the same space in his mind. 2 options, both of them unbearable. Take the USB, give it to Flora, publish every name on every file, including Nadia's, and do the job he was born to do while his family burns down around him. Or close the laptop, destroy the drive, wrap his arms around the life he built, and let a corrupt man become president of the United States on Russian money. Michael picks up the USB drive. He picks up his keys. He walks down the stairs past his daughter's closed bedroom door, past the family photos on the wall, past 16 years of ordinary Tuesday evenings that will never come back. He walks out the front door into the cold October air. Nadia stands at the top of the stairs and asks him what he is going to do. He says, "My job." And he gets in his car and drives. He is 10 minutes from Flora's apartment when the phone rings. Unknown number. He almost does not answer. But something, instinct or fate, or the specific paranoia of a man who has been inside a conspiracy for 3 days, makes him pick up. The voice introduces itself as Alexei Morov, the Russian operative from the photograph. The man, Michael, has been building a case against for the past 72 hours. Before Michael can say anything, Morov tells him he knows Michael is driving to Flora Nkosi's apartment right now. He knows about the USB, and he needs Michael to understand something before he uses it, because if he uses it tonight, everything breaks in the wrong direction. Morov is not a rogue operative. He is a former FSB officer who has been running as a CIA double agent for 11 years. The $400 million Michael thinks he laundered was a controlled intelligence operation, authorized at the highest levels on both sides of the Atlantic, a decade-long effort to build an airtight money trail that would eventually expose not just Raymond Castle, but the people above Castle, the network above the network, the actual source of the money, and the actual buyers of the classified intelligence that has been leaking out of the U.S. government for a decade and a half. Castle, Morov says, is a middle manager, a useful one. But if Michael publishes tomorrow, the people above Castle, the ones whose names are not on any USB drive because they are too careful to leave paper trails, will know the operation is blown. They will vanish. The evidence will be destroyed. And the most dangerous intelligence leak in American history will continue undetected because the only thread that led to it was just cut. Morov asks for 30 days. Michael pulls to the side of the road. The city hums around him, indifferent. He asks Morov who ordered Lena Osai's death. Long pause, the kind of pause that has weight in it. Morov says, "You have not opened the third folder all the way. There is a subfolder inside it. Open it and you will understand why this choice is the hardest one you will ever be asked to make." Michael opens the laptop right there on the side of the road. He finds the subfolder. He opens it. He reads the name inside. And we are not going to tell you that name yet. But the expression on Michael Reeve's face in that dark car on that empty street, if you could see it, would tell you everything. Because it is the face of a man who has just discovered that the person who let Lena Osai die is also the person who, for the past 9 years, has been the closest thing he has to a father. He sits there for a long time. The call has ended. The city moves around him. Somewhere behind him, his wife is sitting alone in a house that still smells like garlic and something warm. He starts the car and drives to Flora's apartment. Whatever comes next is going to come from that room. Flora's apartment at 1 a.m., coffee on the table, curtains drawn. Two people who have known each other for 30 years trying to figure out the most consequential decision of both their lives. Michael tells her everything. Morov, the CIA operation, the 30 days, the subfolder, the name. Flora listens without interrupting. When he finishes, she walks to her window and stands there for a long moment, looking at the Washington skyline. Then she turns around and says the thing Michael has been afraid she would say. She says, "What if Morov is lying?" Not cruelly, not dismissively. She says it the way Flora Nkosi has always said hard things, as a question that deserves a real answer, not a rhetorical one. She lays it out methodically. Michael is 20 minutes away from blowing open the biggest political corruption story in a generation. He has irrefutable evidence. He has a credible publisher. He has everything he needs. And at the exact moment of maximum pressure, a very convenient Russian operative calls him from an untraceable number and tells him to wait, to trust him, to give him 30 days while the people involved have 30 days to scatter. It is, she says, the single most effective play in the counterintelligence playbook. Delay, discredit, disappear. And Michael is being asked to volunteer as the mechanism. Michael says, "Or the operation is real, and if we publish tonight we end the only chance anyone will ever have to catch the people above the people. The names that are not on any USB drive because they are smart enough never to leave fingerprints. Flora says, or it is a bluff. Michael says, or it is the truth. And they sit with that. Two people who love the same things, truth, accountability, the stubborn belief that the facts matter and the public deserves them, and they are pointing those values at each other like weapons. Because Flora's version of truth says publish now and let the chips fall. And Michael's version of truth says the chips might bury something even bigger if they fall tonight. This is the final collision. Not good versus evil, that is too simple. Truth versus justice. The public's right to know now versus the law's best chance to go further. Both of them right. Both of them trapped. One decision, no good options, and a clock ticking toward morning. Michael picks up his phone and dials. Extension 7741. He asks for Operation Clean Hands. 3 rings. Someone picks up, says nothing. Michael says, verify or deny. 3 seconds. The voice says, this line is not secure. Do not call again. And hangs up. Not a denial, not a confirmation, a warning, which is itself a kind of answer. Michael puts the phone down. Flora watches him. He says, I am going to give you everything, every file, every name. The 3rd folder, the subfolder, all of it. And tomorrow morning I am going to walk into the Treasury building and do my job one last time. You are going to be ready to publish everything on my signal. If you have not heard from me by noon, you publish without waiting. You do not call. You do not protect me. You just publish. Flora asks him what the plan is. He says, the plan is to walk into the most dangerous room in Washington with the truth in my hands and see what happens when I put it on the table. She says, that is not a plan, Michael. That is a prayer. He says, I know, but it is the one I have got. He spends 2 hours transferring every file to Flora's secured server. When he is done, he stands up, puts on his jacket, and pauses at her door. He says one more thing, without looking at her, the way you say things you have been carrying for a long time and are finally allowed to put down. He says, Lena tried to do the right thing and nobody helped her. I am not going to be the reason that happens again. Then he walks out into the Washington night and drives home in the dark and sits in his driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Tuesday, 8:03 a.m. Michael Reeve at his desk. Same coffee, same badge swipe, same office. Everything the same and nothing the same. At 9:15, he sends one email. Addressed to the Treasury Inspector General, carbon copied to 3 independent federal prosecutors whose names he has kept in a private file for 7 years. People he trusts, people with no connection to Strand, people who have never had dinner with Raymond Castle. The subject line reads, Evidence of financial crimes. Immediate review requested. He attaches the first 2 folders, not the 3rd, not the subfolder, not Strand's name, not yet. Because he knows that the moment Strand's name surfaces, the response will not be investigation, it will be obliteration. Everything will go into lockdown. Evidence will disappear. People will scatter. He needs the Inspector General to take the first step independently, to open the door from the outside, before Michael hands them what is behind it. He hits send. Sets the phone face down on his desk. Waits. At 10:40, Victor Strand walks into his office. Smiling, easy, the mentor face. Michael has seen that face for 9 years and loves it and is going to have to grieve it the way you grieve something you cannot get back. Strand asks if Michael is ready for the audit review. Michael tells him he needs to ask one question first, just between them. He asks Strand if he knew Lena Osei. The smile does not move, but something behind it does, a micro-adjustment, a recalibration, the face of a man deciding in real time how much he needs to say. He tells Michael that was a long time ago. Michael says, that is not an answer, Victor. Strand steps inside, closes the door, and for the first time in the 9 years Michael has known him, the mentor face drops completely. What is underneath it is colder and flatter and much, much older. He tells Michael to think very carefully about the next 5 minutes. Michael says, I already have. At 11:08 a.m., federal agents enter the Treasury building. Not for Michael, for Strand. The IG had moved faster than Michael expected, which meant the 2 folders he sent were enough, which meant the case had been building longer than he knew, which meant Morov had been telling the truth, and Operation Clean Hands was real, and Michael had just handed the intelligence community the last piece of a decade-long trap that was now, finally, closing. He watches from the window as Victor Strand is walked to a car parked on the street below. No handcuffs yet. That will come later, in a quieter room, with lawyers present. But the walk itself says everything. The careful, controlled walk of a man who knows that every camera is watching, and that the story of the rest of his life is being written right now in the way he holds his shoulders. Michael's phone rings. Flora. She says, "Did you just take down half of Washington?" He says, "The IG's office did. I just gave them the door." She says, "That is a very creative interpretation of events." He says, "I know." She asks what happens now. He says, "Now I go home." Long pause on the line. She asks about Nadia. He says, "Still there, we have a lot to figure out." She says, "Michael, was it worth it?" He does not answer right away. He looks out at Washington, the Capitol dome in the October light, the monuments, the streets full of people who do not know what happened in this building this morning, and will not know until the story breaks and the indictments come, and the whole thing lands on the front page of every newspaper in America. He says, "Ask me in a year." She says, "That is not an answer." He says, "No, it is not." Senator Raymond Castle withdrew from the presidential race 6 days later. The official reason given was health. Nobody in Washington believed that. 11 federal indictments followed over the next 4 months. 4 sitting officials, 2 bank executives, a deputy secretary of state, and 1 former director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network named Victor Strand, who was arraigned on a Tuesday morning and said nothing to the cameras as he walked into the courthouse. The network above the network, the names Morov had been building toward for a decade, began to surface 8 months later in a sealed federal proceeding that produced 31 additional charges and the largest intelligence-linked financial fraud case in U.S. history. None of those names have been released to the public yet. Some of them will be. Some of them will not. Nadia Reeve cooperated fully with federal investigators. Her testimony was central to 3 of the convictions. She was charged with 2 counts of financial conspiracy and received a negotiated sentence that her lawyers described as a recognition of the role she played in ultimately bringing the case forward. Michael did not comment publicly on his wife's case. He did not have to. Michael was placed on administrative leave for 6 weeks pending a review of his conduct. The review concluded that he had acted within his authority. He was offered his job back. He has not yet decided whether to take it. Flora Nkosi published the story in The Atlantic on a Wednesday. It was the most-read piece in the publication's history. She won the Polk Award the following spring. She called Michael from the ceremony and said absolutely nothing for about 10 seconds, and Michael said nothing back. And that silence said everything that needed to be said between 2 people who grew up 3 blocks apart in Baltimore and somehow ended up here. And Lena Osei, 27 years old, dead on a Tuesday night in November, a woman who saw something wrong and raised her hand and was not heard. Her name appeared in every account of the case. Every single one. Michael made sure of it. That was the only part he was certain about from the beginning. The last scene is this. A Baltimore street in November. Michael and a Manny walking, his daughter, 14 years old, sharp as anyone he has ever known, who one day is going to be better at whatever she chooses than he ever was at anything. She does not know all of it yet. She will, but not today. Today is just a walk. She asks him if it was worth it. Kids always ask the question the adults are most afraid of. He thinks about Lena. He thinks about Nadia. He thinks about the 11 years Morov spent in the dark pretending to be someone else so that the right people could eventually be caught. He thinks about Flora picking up the phone from that ceremony. He thinks about Victor Strand's face when the mentor mask finally came off, and what was underneath it, and whether he missed the signs, and whether he should have. He thinks about 17 years of rules, and what they are worth when the people above you are the ones breaking them. He tells Imani, "I did the only thing I knew how to do, Whether it was worth it, that is up to the world now, not me. She thinks about this for half a block. Then she nods, the way 14-year-olds nod when they have decided to accept an imperfect answer because it is at least an honest one. They keep walking. The city keeps going, loud and messy and full of people trying their best in a world that does not make it easy. And somewhere in Washington, in a building that officially does not appear on any public map, a man named Alexei Morov is still working, building the next case, following the next thread. 30 years in the dark, operating in the space between what governments will admit and what actually happens. He has not called Michael again. He will not. But if the day comes when Michael Reeve answers an unknown number at 4:47 in the morning and hears that voice again, he already knows what he will do. His job, no matter what it costs. If this story kept you here till the end, hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm this kind of storytelling belongs here. Subscribe and ring the bell because the next story drops soon, and you do not want to find it 3 weeks late. And drop a comment below. Who did you trust first, Michael, Flora, Nadia, or Morov? We read every single one.